Welcome to the Everstream Analytics 5-minute forecast. This is John Davis, and along with my colleague Mark Russo, we will talk about the supply chain disruptions as we go through the next week's time frame. As we look at overall weather conditions and how it affects the supply chain over the next week, it's a relatively quiet week upcoming with no major disruptions in the supply chain across most areas of the lower 48. If we initially take a look at the situation, and first of all, we'll take a look at the high risk for ports. The only port that has high risk here coming up over the next week or two is in Bermuda, and that is due to high winds actually over the next couple of days. No other major port across the lower 48 or in southern Canada is at high risk during this time frame. As for airports, the only airport with high risk is Denver International Airport. We'll get to that in a second. All other airports across the lower 48 are at relatively low risk, with moderate risk at Seattle Tacoma here coming up. And finally, we'll take a look at intermodal hubs. And for most of the intermodal hub areas, certainly risk is generally on the lower side with no major issues out there. We do have a couple of hubs, mainly in the middle of the country, that are scoring red, mainly due to wind over the next couple of days across those areas. But most of the intermodal hubs are at lower risk here coming up, with most in either the green or the yellow category as we go through the next couple of weeks. We did want to take a look at the kind of situation in Denver. And when we look at that, the reason why Denver is at high risk here coming up is that we do have a pretty significant snowstorm that will be developing over the upcoming weekend across that area. As you can see, this is the snowfall forecast over the next 7 days. Very quiet in the eastern half of the U.S., but areas in and around Denver and the Rockies and in some areas of the plains will get relatively heavy snow coming up over the weekend. If we zoom in to Denver and we look at the situation here upcoming, this is the timeline for Denver International Airport over the next couple of weeks. And we can see here that the high risk is due to that snowstorm, which is coming up over the weekend, primarily on Saturday and on Sunday. And the overall projection does have Denver getting around 12 inches of snowfall here coming up across those areas. So that is just one example of one of the regional disruptions that we'll see. Again, it's over the upcoming weekend on the 13th and 14th, and it will be to snow and wind. So some disruptions will occur in and around that area over the upcoming weekend. But that is about the only major disruptive event across the lower 48 as we go through this middle portion of March. So all in all, relatively quiet conditions here coming up from an overall disruptive standpoint in the overall supply chain network. Now we're going to look to the European sector and the situation there with Mark. Mark?
Thanks, John. As we look around the world, the most significant disruptive event coming up this week is going to be a wind event across Northwest Europe. This wind event starts later in the day on March the 9th and continues for several days as numerous storm systems track from the Atlantic across Northwest Europe. As a result of these storm systems and the winds, can expect disruptions here to vessel movement in and out of ports, and even some closures of ports for a day or two. And also of note, there will be flight delays at some of the cargo airports around that region. Now, some of the disruptions at ports, or some of the main ports included in this list, include Dartmouth, Felixstowe, London in the UK, then Rotterdam and Antwerp in the Netherlands, and Hamburg and Bremen in Germany. Let's take a closer look at the port of Rotterdam. And with the risk upcoming, that begins to increase again later in the day on March the 9th, but overall the March 10th through 12th timeframe looks to be the period of highest risk, when wind gusts will exceed nearly 90 kilometers per hour. And that will again cause disruptions at the ports and even potentially closing the port for a day or two. So overall, that is the most noteworthy item in the global sector coming up. There are some other regional areas of interest, one of which is the Indian Ocean and South Pacific, where we do have some tropical cyclone activity. However, looking at the specific risks to our ports and airports around the region, overall, the risk is to the lower side as the tropical cyclones, Tropical Cyclone Habana and Iman in the Indian Ocean, look to stay offshore and not impact any land area as we go through this week. Thank you for joining today's 5-minute forecast. To learn more about our solutions, please visit our website at everstream.ai. Get in front of what's ahead.